Hello, everyone from EdTech Team Online. It's Tracy Purdy with Dominique Dines. We're both here to bring you guys another Hangout on Air, talking about learning spaces this time. And we have a great guest with us, Brad Ovenell-Carter. And he's going to share a little bit about the process that they went through at his school to create a new learning space for the students. Before I introduce him, I want to remind you guys, if you have any questions, to use the EdTech Team Online hashtag. You can also ask the questions right in the YouTube live event in the Q&A, and Dominique will answer those for you guys. But we were really impressed looking at your guys' learning spaces projects and all the creative ideas that you guys have had. So this will be something to push you a little bit further, and maybe it will generate some new questions or ideas for you guys. So Brad, would you take a minute to first introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you?
Sure. Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good wee hours of the morning, depending on when you're listening to the Hangout. I'm Brad Carter. I used to be the director for the Center for Innovation at Mulgrave School, which is where we did the new addition that Tracy was talking about. And I currently work as a National Leadership Development Executive with Apple Canada. So I've been involved in education, particularly around technology and learning spaces, for about the last 15 years, I guess now, and really excited to be taking the things that I've learned, in schools out to a bigger practice now with Apple.
Awesome, thank you. And I just want to let you guys know too, if you see some people that are behind Brad, he's on his way. He took the time out of his day. He's traveling today, so he's at the airport, and he took the time to
this is a general boarding announcement for all passengers traveling on. So there, now you know we're in an airport.
Yeah.
It's the modern world, right?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So awesome. So do you know, will you tell us a little bit, Brad, about the renovation that you guys did at Mulgrave School? And Mulgrave is in Canada.
Yep. Yeah, so Mulgrave's a pre-K-12 school, an IB school in West Vancouver, independent. The school building, or the site's been there for, I guess it's about 12 years before we started the construction on the new wing. And we realized we wanted to expand the space, not to expand our student population. We're just under 900 students right now, and that'll stay. That's a purposefully set number. Gives us some efficiencies with the teachers, and we think that's about the maximum size community you can build before you start to lose touch with the edges. So we wanted to give a more modern space. It's an independent school. Parents pay a lot of money. We felt that the kids needed more for what the parents are paying. And there were some things that we wanted to embody about new pedagogies, new learning, and building for the future. It's an unusual process when you build a building like that, because you have to meet your needs now and the needs in the next couple of years, but that building's going to be there for the next 20, 25 years. So you're trying to guess, what is education? What's going to be happening 2 decades from now, which is forever, right? Especially at the pace that this world is going. So how do you do that? What do you build around? And we put a lot of thought into that. We knew we wanted a modern space, and you can kind of picture in your mind what we're talking about when you think of, sort of open mobile furniture and things like that. But we were very careful not to get caught up in the hardware and the actual structure. And so what we did right away was sit down with the team, the school leadership, and very importantly, some student leadership there. We invited some students in. We said, you are the ones who are going to be using this space. It's a design thinking approach, although we didn't label it that as such. But you guys, at the end of the day, however much we might know about pedagogy and the future of learning and budgets and things, the constraints we're working with, you're the ones who are going to use this space. What's going to work for you? And we'll get to some of the things that they talked about in a moment. But what we did to start with was come up with some framing ideas, some principles that we wanted to build in. I think it's more important to build principles rather than things or spaces. So we came up with a list of words like personalization, flexibility, independence, really soft kinds of ideas that we wanted to have reflected in the architecture of the building. Because if you build something that is, sort of typical long, narrow, dark corridors, and you want to have the idea of freedom of movement, that just doesn't say that to you. And so we took that to the, the actual design team, the architects and the engineers, and sat down with them. The whole process was over a year long, just the designing process. And it's fascinating. You start with literally a rectangle. The architects will say, okay, if you're going to have these many students and these many classrooms, you're going to need, X thousand cubic meters of space. And now we can start taking it literally like a block of clay and carving it up and bending it according to these principles. But the starting place was this set of principles. And that turned out to be probably the best thing we've done and will certainly carry forward in all future learning, was to design around that. And I think the reason is, as I said, it's pretty hard to know what the world's going to look like 5 years down the road, let alone 20 years down the road. But we know those principles aren't going to change. We know that personalizing learning and authenticity in learning and flexibility, because we might have to change the layout of the space, that's not going to change. Furniture is going to change, that kind of stuff. But those principles won't. Those are values that the school holds. And in fact, we use the same set of values in driving our strategic plan in school. This is the last final boarding call for our Canada Flight 2. Sorry for all these.
No problem. Brad, I love hearing that, because definitely one of the things that we focused a lot on in this course was thinking about space drivers. That's what we called them, or space drivers. So these same things that you're saying, like personalization, authenticity, and flexibility. Can you share maybe a couple, when you were talking about flexibility, what did you guys do in the space that created flexibility?
Yeah, so we ran into, even if it was a small decision, like which size table. So the typical classroom has tables and chairs, everything's on wheels, because we know we wanted that flexibility, or that mobility, horizontal mobility. But we also put some extra high tables in there because we realized this was student input, they wanted vertical flexibility. Some of the kids in school are really big, particularly some of the boys who are on, say, the rugby team. They're huge guys. And to sit at a room uncomfortable for them. And sometimes you just want to stand up. So we made sure we had some high tables in there. But, a more illustrative way, I guess, of looking at how this can be principle driven. We were trying to decide what size tables. Do we go for single seat tables, 2, 4, 6, whatever it is? And we went back and forth and back and forth, and we were lining up endless numbers of arguments for big tables and small tables, until somebody piped up. They said, hey, look, one of our drivers is personalization. Smaller tables are more personal than big ones. We don't want to go to individuals, so let's go to basically a 2-person table, and we can shuffle those around and rearrange them as we need. And having been in the space for 2 years now, that paid off. Initially some people said they wanted, the big 8-foot long sort of boardroom style tables, that kind of thing. But we realized pretty quickly that we're moving furniture around a lot, and that would have been hard to do. We just wouldn't have given us the same flexibility. So 2-person was this nice marriage of flexibility and personalization. The other thing we built into the space, and this, if we were to rebuild, we'd probably put even more of these in, but these were breakout rooms that the students have access to. So we built, I think it's 12 learning spaces and 9 breakout spaces. And these are like little meeting rooms that seat anywhere from 3 to 10 people. And we just scattered them out throughout the building. And students have first right on them. If we were to have this hang out in one of those spaces, and a couple of students came and said, hey, sorry, Mr. OC, we need this space to study for exams, we're obliged to leave. The only time teachers would get dibs on it is if there was maybe a parent interview, or they had scheduled a room for oral exams that they were recording or something like that. But that transformed the learning behavior overnight. Within 24 hours of the kids moving into the space, they were phoning home saying, hey, Mom, can you pick me up later? I want to stay late and work in one of these spaces, or I want to get to school early. Until afterwards, that, it was kind of one of those things where you smack yourself in the forehead, that all our students have a spare block in there, a couple of spare blocks in the week, and typically they would go hang out and fool around. And as teachers were going around, why don't you use your time more effectively? Why aren't you studying? And kind of wagging our fingers at them. And then when we put these breakout rooms, all of that disappeared, and the kids would be in these spaces learning. And they might be just hanging out with friends, but they are focusing much more. And we realized that if you or I need to work quietly and diligently, I go to my office and I shut the door. But there is traditionally no space like that for kids to kind of go and shut the door and just get down to work unless they're in a class. So providing that space transformed the entire school. And it's had this ripple effect through the rest of the building. The rest of the divisions in the older building are all asking for the same thing now. And that's personalization. I need to go to a place where I can work quietly now.
That's awesome. That's really, really great. And I love the curving walls. They weren't just straight walls. I got to come and visit the school earlier and seeing that and all the unique individual spaces outside of each classroom, a theater space for students to perform. It's pretty incredible what you guys have done. And hopefully people can maybe be able to look up some pictures of that space. I don't know if there are some available for people or not, but that would be great. So
there are a few there, and I'll see what I can pull up for you. I was just going to say, like, one of the other principles that we used as a driver in the design was, you know, that old cliche, it takes a village to raise a child. We said, well, if that's the case, what are the physical attributes of a village? And, you know, there's always a meeting square. So we have that big open space. If you're familiar, it's a huge fireplace. You know, it's either a fountain or a fire that brings people together. We have this grand staircase. We could have made it smaller, but we recognize that, you know, the Spanish Steps in Rome, for example, a place where people can just sit on the steps. Fire regulations say you can't actually sit on the stairs. So we have these little bays just off the staircase where you can just plunk yourself down and watch traffic come and go. And these curving, you know, the curving hallways, I mean, those lovely old cities that we love to visit, they don't have straight roads and they feel organic and user-friendly rather than car-friendly. So that was an echo of that. It was quite on purpose.
Yeah, and you shared a little bit about this too, just that kids were now wanting to study and meet together. Are there any other effects that you've seen on learning because of the design?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely one. The kids, you know, if you go out, well, in class too, I mean, typically what a teacher will do is you have your kind of instructional 10 or 15 minutes at the beginning of class, and then the kids are, you know, want to go and work, and they're free. They just go say, hey, Mr. O.C., can I go work in one of the breakout rooms? And you go, yeah, of course you can. And you know, they're designed, they're glass walls, so you can see that the kids are kind of focusing. But it allows them to work with, you know, their classmates on something together. If they want to do a recording of something, it's a quiet space now that they can do that. So that's changed. We also put in the classrooms, we have twin flat screen TVs instead of a projector. And that's not used as much yet as it's designed to be, but we're already seeing, I mean, the idea there is, as a teacher, we can have some content that we're talking about on one screen and then either have a back channel on the other screen or student work, some exemplars, the student can quickly put up on the screen, or bring somebody else into the room to have a conversation with us. So the twin screen thing is significant. And we're starting to see teachers, I guess you call it sort of like the studio model. You know, you can have an exemplar on one screen and student work on the other, and you can have a class critique. It's also shifted the axis of instruction. I mean, whether it's a smartboard or a projector, that's still a one-to-many axis of instruction. But with the twin flat screen TVs, that allows many to many. It means anybody in the room can now share what they've got on their device. And we've got it set up so it doesn't matter whether you're using an Apple device, a PC device, a mobile phone, whether it's iOS or Android. All of those can be connected to either screen with a couple of clicks.
That's awesome. The final boarding call. Yep. Brad, do you have time for a couple questions? Or?
Sure do. Yep.
Great. Dominique, have we had a couple questions come in?
Should now be on board through gate C48.
Sorry, I was on a different screen. We haven't had any questions coming in yet. We do have a few people watching us live, but teachers always love knowing a quick tip of something they could do tomorrow or something they could do immediately with what they have. So, any ideas for that?
Yep. Yeah, particularly for the sort of middle school and senior school, I would say take cues from the junior school. We paid a lot of attention to what goes on in a primary classroom. Primary classrooms are the best learning spaces there are. I mean, there's stations full of paper and crayons, so if you want to work with art stuff, you can. There's quiet corners, there's soft furnishings, you can sit on the floor, you can stand up. And recognizing that not everything has to happen with the kids in their seats. You can very quickly arrange your classroom with a bit of soft furnishings, a carpet where kids can get on the floor if they want, and allow the kids to get up and move during your class instruction time. There will almost always be time where they can do that. And the feedback we had from the kids is, one, they just like to get up and stretch, but it gives them a sense of power, I think, being able to decide where they work. And even out and spilling out in the hallway would be something. And you can do that tomorrow. Go to a secondhand store and get a couple of comfy couches and get those in every classroom. And even just outside the door of your classroom, the kids can go sit out there, hang out in the hallway, but they're still close enough for you to keep an eye on them if that's your school culture.
That's great. That's something to start with right away in their spaces. Yep. Any last advice for people, Brad, who are trying to just start thinking about spaces in a new way, or trying to understand how important space is for?
Yeah, I think the key thing is to appreciate the relationship between space and, again, those values that you hold. To say that, designing a space this way shows, a 2-point increase in GPA or something is just, you're not going to be able to measure that. There's no way you can control the variables for that. But recognize that space does reflect at a school. And you can say we value flexibility and student ownership and things like that. But if your kids can never get out of the classroom, can never move out of their seat, and can never choose to go to another place, you don't really value independence and student ownership. I was in a school, it was fantastic. That's what they were saying, that, student ownership and independence is our primary value. But on the wall in the classroom, where it was a student assignment, and every assignment was the same, and everyone was posted at a height that was higher than the kids could reach. So I'm not seeing real independence. You're asking the kids all to do the same thing, and they can't even put their own work on the board. So look for that, how does the physical space allow kids to take ownership? If you're displaying art, let the kids put it up at their height if you're in a junior school. Don't put it up at adult height. Adults should be bending down. One of the best books I've read about education that's not about education is David Byrne's How Music Works. David Byrne's, the front man for Talking Heads. Yeah. And he's got a section in there about creativity and genius. And we all think that genius and creativity can kind of flourish anywhere. And his argument is that's not the case. And he points to Mozart's music. And he said Mozart could not write the music he wrote until the invention of the concert hall, because those tiny delicate notes on a piccolo or a single note on a string of a violin would get lost in a bar somewhere or outside, and vice versa. I was at a Dan Mangan concert, and it was played in a concert hall in Vancouver. And I like Dan Mangan's music, sort of a Canadian folk rock guy. But the music was meant to be played either outside or in a bar. And it started to reverberate and bounce so much that I walked out on the concert. It just became this wash of noise. And Byrne points out to even birds of the same species will tweak their song depending on the environment they've adapted to. Like music carries differently in the woods than it does in the grassland. So his argument is that our physical spaces will determine the kinds of things that we're capable of putting out. So if our desks are in rows and the classrooms are dark and the kids can't get up and move, we're not going to get that kind of creativity and open and entrepreneurial spirit and critical thinking that we want. All of that stuff was designed for an industrial model of, sort of cookie cutter approach to teaching. So you have to live your values. And if you're going to live your values, you have to have the spaces that you can do that. If I say you're free to go anywhere, but there's nowhere to go, or the places you go, you can't plug in your devices, then you don't really have the freedom to go. So, make the space embody your values.
I think that that's probably the very best thing for everybody to be able to hear. I loved that statement that physical space determines what those students will be capable of. So that's something great piece of advice to leave us with. And we just want to thank you so much for taking the time to meet with us.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Appreciate it. And if people have questions, they'll probably tweet them out a little bit later as well. So we might follow up with you with a few of those, and hope you have a great trip.
Thank you, and I apologize for the interruptions, but the trip came up at the last minute, so.
No worries. We're glad we
All
could
right.
still meet with you. So thanks again, Brad, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you very much. All the best, everybody. Good luck in your buildings.
Thanks.